hearts and our understanding.
Amen.
Please be seated. There's one word that has kept popping up in the week that has just passed. It's the word dark. It's come to my mind. Sort of feeling some of the darkness of the world in a different way. Maybe it was because I saw some hope and that didn't work out the way I thought it was going to. But I've also heard it in conversations with many different people. I've heard it from news commentators. I've heard it from people on the street. And it's not all connected just to the election, though a lot of it is. But it's connected kind of to where we find ourselves in the world at this time in history. So today we read a reading from the Gospel of Mark. And the Gospel of Mark was written in a very dark time, eerily similar to our own. The story we read this morning of the widow's mite is only seen for what it really says, what Jesus intended in telling it. It's only seen for that when we remember that the whole point of Mark's Gospel was colored by the deep darkness in which the world lived, both under the political oppression of Rome and under the religious oppression that was centered around what the temple powers had done with the heart of Judaism, which was to stomp all over it. So although most of us were taught to think of this story as a lesson about sacrificial giving, remember, well, when I was a kid, we had little mite boxes, and you'd read this story, you'd put your little coins in the mite boxes, and it was, you know, even a little bit is something, but it's often used as stewardship time for, like, you know, not just a little bit, give everything, because God has given everything to you. Sacrificial giving is the way it's been taught. Jesus seems to be stressing something else when you actually take a closer look at this gospel. Leading up to this story about the widow's mite, there are a series of stories centered around the very same thing. Jesus in confrontation either with political powers, religious powers, or both, calling them to account, answering them very carefully, but speaking a truth to them about the darkness of political and religious structures that step on the poor. In each interaction, Jesus challenges the way those structures work. He doesn't say, and go be like them. So that story, this story that we read this morning, and this passage that was picked for us, this story that we like to call the widow's mite, it's the last story in that series of thought. And this vignette in Jesus' life doesn't really end in Mark's gospel where we ended in the readings we read. The way these readings have been structured, it makes a great case for sacrificial giving, and the fall is often a time for stewardship. So we get to preach this and say, be like the widow. She gave everything. But the end of the story actually comes in the very next verse that's written after it. It's the verse that begins Mark 13. And in that verse, after we hear that Jesus has watched what was happening in the temple, and has watched how the scribes, who he starts off that passage by addressing people to beware of the scribes. And so that passage really ends here as we're hearing him watching those same scribes he just told people to beware of, watching how they put all their big sums of money to support the power structure of the temple, not just the building, but the whole power structure of the temple. And then he watches a poor widow she comes and she puts 2 small coins in the treasury. And he turns to the disciples and he says, that's what I'm talking about. Look at that. It didn't mean a thing that these people put in those big sums. They have an abundance. And they get more abundance because they are the power structure. Look at this poor widow. She doesn't have an abundance. Out of poverty, she just gave everything she had to live on. And then the next verse he says, and this temple will be torn down. It will be torn down until not stone upon stone remains. That is the first verse of the Mark 13. That shows us more about this whole passage. It ends this passage about Jesus challenging the structures that would leave a poor widow feeling like the only way she could be a part of anything was to give her last 2 coins. And what that means for a system built to keep widows in their place. Single women who had to be dependent on somebody else. What it meant for a system to keep widows in their place. And he calls down for that system to be torn down. He's not just talking about a building. He's talking about the religious and political power structures that work together to keep a poor widow stuck in poverty, then takes the last bit she does have and leaves her there with nowhere to go and nowhere to live. The widow lives in a dark time. She lives in the oppressively dark times that Jesus himself experienced during his own days on earth. What Mark emphasizes through his gospel, though, is this. In those dark times, Jesus calls those who follow him to be a light in that darkness. To be a light in that darkness. I think that's why so many times people I've heard talking about the darkness today often remind us of what Mr. Rogers used to say. When times are dark, and he didn't say it exactly that way, but basically look for the helpers. In dark times, it's good to look for the helpers, the advocates, the community leaders, and the workers who work to help set people free. And what I've heard also, when people have talked about dark times, they have said, don't even just look for the helpers that are out there. Find out more about them. See what these groups are doing already to bring light in the darkness. One such group meets right here at St. Luke's once a month. And our own Rick Roach, where did he go? There he is. Our own Rick Roach is an at-large representative of its governing board. It's a statewide organization. The group is called SOCM. Rick may tell us what it used to stand for. Are you going to do that? Okay. But I'll let him, I won't mess up his story. But today it's known as the Statewide Organizing for Community Empowerment. And I invited Rick to speak to us for a few minutes this morning about the light in the darkness that SOCM has been for, 30 years, 50 years, a long time, for a long, long time.
Since 85.
Yeah, it is a group dedicated to kindling light wherever they find darkness. Rick?
I have nothing else to say. Because it may not necessarily be about soccer in and of itself, but what Gayle was describing.
Y'all know I'm a St. Luke's boy, and I was raised by the likes of Matthew Jones. So in that context, of course, my parents. And so I grew up, as a good portion of us were, but I think I have a particular awareness of the times that I grew up through and was participating in and didn't even know I was participating in it, that I was part and parcel of what was going on. Well, what I did notice was that there were people, poor people, average, everyday people, who were disempowered. And what I ended up coming up with in my own mind to justify this was, when I was younger, that people put themselves in that position. They deserved it, you know? And that's just not the case. And so, as I had to work through particular situations that I was personally involved in, just a quick thing. At the age of 14, I was chosen to go into a program to integrate white Southern private preparatory schools, college preparatory schools. And it wasn't the best fit. In fact, the day I went for my interview at the first school I went to, Martin Luther King had just been killed. This was 1968. So I had to work myself through all of that. And then looking at the institutions, the powers and principalities that we talk about, that you hear mentioned in, I guess it's Romans, that is described. Things became clear, but I didn't know what path I was to follow and what I was to go through in carrying out that, and being a solution instead of a problem. So I had to change my attitude, okay, about people in general. Didn't matter what you look like. I had to focus on taking time to get to know people. And in that process, eventually, I got involved in community. This particular community, because I knew this community. I love this community. And I've watched it go through all its different changes. But then I had to realize that there was not just this insular entity of East Knoxville, that it was connected to literally the rest of the world. That means I have to make a connection. And so I have to take time to get to know individuals. And sometimes you end up finding out things you thought were correct. You find out that they're not correct. That, you know, first thing I had to do was make sure in my mind the whole thing, not just about separation of categories that are assigned by other folk. I had to realize I was part of a human family. And eventually, fast forward, we ended up coming to I ended up being involved with different organizations, not really joining. And so when Gayle was first here as our rector, as our first call rector, I already had interest. In other areas, I started focusing on healthcare, and I started focusing on the environment because I was being educated to what was going on in terms of this category of racism and how people that look like me and come from the same experience as me were being affected by things in this country, in healthcare, particularly in environmental issues. And so I took it upon myself because as a child I played out right down here on Williams Creek, up and down the creek. I learned that it was dying, and it was a vital part of the community. So I appointed myself to do that, and I got St. Luke's involved, okay? Because that's the tradition I created. And so when I first started doing the Williams Creek stuff, I had some people from soccer come to me and say, Rick, we've heard about what you're doing. Can we support you? How can we support you? I remember we met over here, Ann League and Cassie Waters. We met over at Chandler's on Magnolia and had lunch, and we talked about how they could support some of the efforts that we were making. And there were other organizations involved. So that's when my first experience with soccer came to fruition. But I didn't join the organization, okay, which was a mistake at that time. And so fast forward, there's a young man that shows up, his name is Adam Hughes. He's now an organizer for soccer, and specifically for primarily Middle and East Tennessee. And he had heard about some of the things that were happening here, talking about housing, the situation. And I just thought to myself, you know, this kid, man, he's bugging hell. He's from Connecticut. He's plain spoken and he's just nerdy as all get out. He's getting on my nerves. And, you know, okay, dude, yeah, whatever, okay? But eventually, because he's an organizer, he knows he has to be persistent. And he knows he has to listen to people and be patient. You know, he won me over. And the other part of that was, as you all know, Tina Sparks. I still wasn't ready to join, so Tina just enrolled me into soccer. She paid that $20 fee and things, and okay, let's go to the meetings. And along with that, John Mott and Wanda and other people who had familiarity, Barbara, you know, were kind of present, and you know, I said, okay, it might not be a bad organization. So as I got further involved with SOCM, there were interest groups. And SOCM comes from Save Our Cumberland Mountains. That's the original acronym. That's the original definition of it. Harlan County, Eastern Kentucky. Yeah, some good things do come from Kentucky. Okay, but as their mission, focusing on dealing with the coal mine situation from Eastern Kentucky and then Eastern Tennessee, Northeastern Tennessee developed and came to fruition with that. The people in Tennessee said, you know what? We still have to serve the interests of the people. We still want to serve the interests of the people. And then they morphed into statewide organizing for community empowerment. Okay? And that's how it came to be. And the good thing about soccer is, believe me, I don't join organizations easily. You know, it's just a hard thing for me. But what they did was they focused on the needs of the people in a particular community. If it was an issue, then that's what was done. That's what was focused on. And you know, I had some interesting things to try and do through St. Luke's Investing, getting us to kick into community and support organizations. And some of that didn't work out, okay? And, but it was determined that, you know, we were gonna keep pushing, you know. And as my involvement with soccer group, we took on, right now we have 3 primary focus groups. One is housing, and housing stability, and housing insecurity. The other is public education strong. That's the group name of the group, public education strong. They are literally state. That interest group, interest from Northeast Tennessee to the Memphis, Shelby County area. They bring people in, teachers, students, parents, okay? Trying to make public education stronger in Tennessee, in the state of Tennessee. The third group, basically, they're centered in the southern Cumberland Plateau in Tennessee. Marion County, Grundy County, those folks are going, and they're focused on what's happening with the interest, with the mining interest groups that have taken over the plateau, which we don't ever hear about. Those people are watching their environment be depleted on a daily basis, and it is based in the need for people to to make money. And that's, you know, as Gayle spoke, that's why I said I didn't really want to. You were covering it all, and if we were paying attention, if we focus, we can take what Gayle was describing from the gospel. And the bad thing about when we do our Sunday lessons is there's a before story. There's what we're reading, but then there's the after part. And Gayle's referencing all of that to set up a complete picture. Okay? And like I said, I didn't really want to add anything. Okay? But, you know, real time, real place. Monday, I had to hear about the burning down of the administrative building at Knoxville College. And so my mother was educated at Knoxville College. So that was a thing. And there's a whole story behind that, what's going on. Yeah, and Walter can even probably give you some background information.
I just want to say that the building that burned was L. Nathan Hall. L. Nathan Hall had been used as a women's dormitory at Knoxville College. The administration building is the key hall. It's still standing.
It's still standing, okay. I'm trying to get my story straight here. But in the watching of the burning of that, and the pictures, and the whole commentary of some things that I know, and other people in the community, that said to me, yeah, you're in the right place at the right time. So, getting back to Sockham, because of our issue-based, community-based format, okay, we're going to be here at St. Luke's for a minute. I've told them, you know, as long as you want to come through the doors, this is your home. Okay? We're open. Anybody can come to the meetings. We'd like to have you join. We meet on the 4th Thursdays.
At 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
In our
every
parish
month, yes, in the parish hall. Or sometimes we decide to come in here and sit in the sanctuary because that kind of gets people centered on dealing with stuff. So.
Thank you.
Whether we ever go to a Sockham meeting or not, Sockham remains, because it does meet here, a part of our extended St. Luke's family. And I think that it's important for us to get to know those parts of our extended St. Luke's family. Battlefield Farms is a part of our extended St. Luke's family. Certainly the East Knoxville Hospitality Pantry is a part of that. So I think that it's important for us to keep an awareness that these are lights. And there is darkness in our own communities. There is a feeling sometimes that you just can't get past this wall that's there. And that can begin to feel in our emotions a very dark place to be. But Christ is the light. And the gospel truth is always that wherever there is darkness, it's up to us to kindle the light of Christ. Amen.
Amen. Amen.